Hello and welcome to another Q&A live session all about OET. My name is Rebecca and I'm joining you live from Melbourne in Australia, and the format of these sessions are really simple. For the next 60 minutes you are able to ask me your preparation questions about OET live and I will answer them for you live on air. So if you're getting ready for your OET test coming up perhaps before the end of this year, or even if you're just thinking about OET and you're planning to take your test next year, if you have a question that you would like to ask me about preparing for the test, then pop it into the comment box either in Facebook or YouTube. Both of those sets of comments are coming through to me live now, and I will answer as many of them as I can in the next 60 minutes. And it's great to see already we've got over 200 candidates joining us live. We've got about 100 each on Facebook and on YouTube. So make sure if you haven't already liked or subscribed to those pages that you do so now or by the end of this session to make sure you're getting regular updates from OET. So I think I can see questions flooding in already. So I'm going to head on over to the comments and to make sure I answer as many of them as possible. Thanks to everybody who is already saying hello and joining the session. Here's the first question coming from Kristen in YouTube, who says, is the word via considered an informal word, and do we need to avoid it in our letter? So Kristen, via isn't considered an informal word particularly. It's a fairly neutral word. It's a way of saying through or by. It's another way of saying that expression. So for example, you might use the patient was transported to hospital via ambulance or was admitted to hospital via ambulance. That's an absolutely standard sort of expression to use in healthcare writing, so you can definitely use it in your letter. This is another question from YouTube from Obeda, who's saying, can I ask a technical question about reading, please? Are the texts and questions printed on both sides or only one side and the other side is empty paper? So obviously this is a question about taking OET on paper, which a lot of our candidates are doing at the moment. OET on computer is also available. But if you're taking OET on paper, then as you know, you have for reading part A, a text booklet, which is completely separate to your question booklet. And each is an open A4 spread. So you'll have 2 pages which open out as a booklet of text and 2 pages which open out as a booklet for the questions for reading A. For reading B and C, you have 1 booklet. You write your answers directly into the text booklet, and each page for part B will have a different question on it, but they are printed back to back. So they're double-sided. You'll have the question and text for reading B, the first one, on one side, and then the second question on the other side. The same is true for reading part C. Ala is saying, again from YouTube, regarding case note selection for a discharge letter, is it relevant to include all of the results of the investigations done, or we can just mention the tests briefly? So with any letter, it doesn't have to just be a discharge letter. It could also be a referral letter or a transfer letter. Your choice, and this is why we give you 5 minutes reading time before you can start writing your response. Your choice is to decide which of those case notes you need to include for the reader. And that will depend on what you're requesting the reader to do as part of the writing task. So depending on what reason you have for discharging the patient to the reader will depend on how much of the hospitalization content will still be relevant for the reader. It could be that very little of that content is relevant now because obviously the patient is in a position to be discharged, they're feeling better or they've recovered sufficiently to be discharged. So a great amount of detail about the hospitalization treatment might be unnecessary. because it's completed or because that's routine, it's standard, the reader would be familiar with that anyway. But if it's a discharge perhaps to a rehabilitation centre, then it may be that you do need to include more of those details from the hospitalisation for smooth change of care from one setting to another setting. A question from Facebook: when will the 9th of October results be out? So I'm afraid, know that off the top of my head, but for those sorts of questions related to test dates, when a test date's available, when a test result's out, you can find all of those details from the booking page of the OET website, and I've just posted that into the comment box. You can have a look at the test dates for this year. It's a drop-down item, and you can find the test that you've sat and when your results will be available. Jose is also asking about test results from YouTube. It's been 26 days since I've taken my OET at home, but I haven't had my results yet. How can I follow up with OET? So for any questions relating to your test day procedure, your booking, your results, if something hasn't gone exactly as you expected, or you need some help or support perhaps with your ID or with the booking process, then the best people to talk to are the OET customer service team. And it's really easy for you to contact them. They're available 24 hours a day via live chat, Monday to Friday. So visit the OET website, and I'll just type that website into the chat box now in case you're not familiar with it. Make sure you go to the OET website, look for the green help button, which should be in one of the lower corners of the page, and click on that, and you can start live chatting with one of our customer service team who can provide you with support or an update. Marwa is saying on Facebook, I would like to know where I should start studying. So that's a great question. And the place that we really recommend you start is the OET Prepare page. Another link just going into the chat box now. On the Prepare page, we have everything that you need to get started with OET preparation. We have masterclasses, which are short 20-minute videos explaining each part of the test so that you're clear on the way that part of the test runs, what you're being tested on, and what skills in English you'll need to have developed to be successful in that part of the test. We obviously have sample tests, so you can take the test either in a paper version or a computer version to help you make a decision about which format of the test you want to take it in, but also whether you feel comfortable with the skills that you have already, being at a point to take OET. And we also have links to the Start for Success pack, which is a 6-week downloadable program that you can use to start preparing for OET. The OET blog articles are housed there, and much, much more. So the Prepare page is definitely the best place to get started on OET. Anu is asking a question from YouTube. Have there been any updates to OET writing? There haven't been any updates to OET writing, or actually for any part of the test. The format of OET hasn't changed now for several years, and there is no plan for that to change going forward into next year or beyond. So there is the information that you find on the Prepare page that I've just linked to in the chat is completely accurate and is helping you to prepare for the test that you will see on test day. Priyanka has a question about listening part A coming from Facebook. Can we underline the notes while listening in part A? You do have the ability to underline words or questions in listening part A if you're taking the test on paper. If you're taking the test on computer, there isn't an option to underline there, but you just type the word or short phrase into the box on the screen as you listen to the recording, which is nice and straightforward. Ayat Also on Facebook is saying, are we allowed to write the visit in 2 paragraphs if it has a lot of information? Absolutely, you can. So this is another of those choices that you need to make, and perhaps is another way you can use the 5 minutes reading time before you start writing your letter. I already mentioned using some of that time to decide which information you should include for the reader. But another way that you can use that 5 minutes reading time is to, in your mind, structure the letter. How many paragraphs do you think you're going to write? What is the main topic or time period for each of those paragraphs? So that when the writing time starts, you could perhaps make a very quick plan, writing down those numbers of paragraphs and the contents that you want to include in them. It helps you to make your letter much more structured, much more relevant and organized to the reader if you have considered how many paragraphs you want to include. And certainly shorter paragraphs that are on one individual topic is preferred. It's clearer organization than writing a really long paragraph that covers many different topics, even if it's just from one time period. Here's a question. I wrote made a typo instead of writing practitioner. I assume your question is what will be the result of that. So let me reassure you that there are no immediate penalties for individual mistakes. The way the assessors are grading your writing is how well you have communicated the information overall throughout your letter. So if you had just made this one individual spelling mistake or typo, that wouldn't have a significant impact on language, which is the assessment criteria that spelling is included as part of. If you had many spelling mistakes and the impact of those spelling mistakes meant the reader would have to read each sentence a couple of times to fully understand what it was you're trying to communicate, then that could impact your language score. But as I said a few seconds ago, there's no immediate penalty for individual mistakes. It's overall communication that the assessors are looking at. Soumya on YouTube is saying, can we use abbreviations like CT or BP? So certainly abbreviations like CT or MRI or BMI even, which are much more familiar than the full forms, even to patients, can certainly be used as an abbreviation in your letter. Other abbreviations like BP, or you should really think about expanding into the full form, unless you're writing to a specialist, perhaps somebody who would be a specialist in the abbreviation you're writing about, in which case the abbreviation would be suitable for their use. But in general usage, expanding abbreviations that aren't more common than the full form is advised to make sure you keep the formality of the letter. Treza or Traza is saying on YouTube, is 4 weeks enough for preparation? So this will depend on what your current level of English is right now. And one way you can find out your current language level is by taking OET Pulse, which is a short placement test designed to check your current language level, your listening, reading, and use of English skills. I'm just popping that into the comment now. And the results will tell you where your language sits compared to an OET grade. And that will give you a good indication of whether you need a lot of preparation to get ready for OET, or perhaps something like 4 weeks could be sufficient for you to get ready. So with your results, you're sent some advice to guide you about what type of preparation you might need, how much preparation you might need. So it's a really good way to be confident about when you might be ready to take the test. The other factor that comes into when you might be ready for taking the test is really how much time per week you can devote to studying. Obviously, as a very busy healthcare professional who's only able to study perhaps for an hour every day, you then need to leave longer between now and when you book your test to give you sufficient time to prepare properly and thoroughly for OET. But if you're able to study part-time or even full-time, then you might not need quite so long to get ready for the test. Emma says, do we have to count the words in writing in OET paper-based? You don't need to count the words either in paper-based or in computer-based OET. You're simply given a rough guidance on how many words should be included in your letter to help you know how much content is needed to communicate these details to the reader in the 40 minutes that you have allowed. So it's there really to remind you that these test materials have been created and tested to make sure that all of the necessary information can be included within that guided word limit of 180 to 200 words and within a 40-minute writing period. So there's no need to actually count your words. The assessors also are not going to count your words. It's just there to act as a guide for you. Jithu on YouTube is saying, could you please tell me about the connectors used in OET letters? So there are many types of connector in English, really simple connectors that we use in most sentences, and those are connectors like and or but or because. And those connectors, as I said, because we use them so frequently, are highly likely to be used in your writing test. Other types of connectors like which or who or that, or however or therefore, are also likely to be needed at different parts of your letter. But there are other types of connector that are perhaps less suitable for letter writing, more suitable for academic essay writing. And those are connectors that include moreover, furthermore, hence, also comes into that bracket. So consider whether the connector you want to use is suitable for letter writing. But then also, if it is another connector like however or additionally or otherwise, do you need the connector? Is the connector performing a function, i.e. is it connecting an idea, or is it just added in there for show, and if you removed it, you're not actually changing the meaning of the sentence or the meaning for the reader? Don't add connectors just because you think they might score you extra marks. That's not the way that assessment works for OET. It's all about efficient communication between healthcare professionals. And so if the connector isn't adding any value to your letter, you should omit it. Only use them when they are needed. Max is saying, can you tell me more about OET at home? Is it the same as OET on paper? So OET on paper is obviously conducted at venues using physical paper tests that you answer using a mixture of pencil or pen. Now for OET on computer, we have two options there. OET on computer at a venue, where you would go and sit at one of a number of computer terminals in a venue, or OET at home, which is the same test as the one on computer at a venue, but this time it is taken by you sitting in your home, much like I'm doing now, using my laptop, and an invigilator is watching you throughout your test through your camera, through your device camera. Now, whichever test you take, on paper, on computer, or at home, the test is exactly the same. The way that the test is run is exactly the same in terms of timing, in terms of types of question. It's simply that you are taking it in a computer format rather than a paper format. Amanda says from YouTube, for listening, if due to time I shortened a medication name, for for example, hydrocort instead of hydrocortisone, would I get the mark? My understanding, Amanda, is that for that answer, you wouldn't get the mark correct, I'm afraid, because it is an incomplete answer. The assessors do need you to write complete answers for your listening part A responses. And that would be true of any word, not just a medication name. You do need to write the complete word as the answer for it to be counted by the assessors. Sebastian is saying, could you please explain about the punctuation rules, especially commas in OET writing? So there's lots of different ways that commas can be used to increase clarity in your sentence. I can't really go into a lot of examples with you on screen, because to do that I'd need to have a whiteboard and some examples that I could show you. But what I can do is give you a link to the OET blog in the chat box. If you go to the OET blog page, which is coming up in the comments now, you'll see a search box. And if you type comma or commas into that search box, a number of different articles will come up about the different uses of comma, how you're expected to use them in your letter, and will be really helpful for you if that's a current weakness. All right, I'm just going to skip a little bit further ahead so that I make sure I'm answering some more recent questions. So this one I can see from Mary is touching on a question I've just sort of answered. There's 3 types of tests that are available. Which one is better? So in terms of the test contents, as I mentioned earlier, they are equal. There's no difference between the contents of the test, regardless of which type of test you take. So really, in terms of which one is better, it comes down to which is your personal preference and which is available to you in your location. So OET on paper is available in around 46 countries around the world. There's lots of paper-based venues, and many candidates still feel more comfortable completing the test physically using a pen or a pencil. We've got increasing numbers of OET on computer venues, and these are available in around 180 different cities around the world. Some candidates feel more familiar, more comfortable typing answers, and so for them, that is a preference that they would prefer to use computer rather than paper. OET at home is currently only available to candidates who don't have access in their country either to paper or computer on a venue. So it may be that that isn't currently an option for you right now. It could become one in the future, perhaps next year. So you need to check out what is available to you. And the booking page that I linked to a little bit earlier in this session is a really good way of finding out what type of venue is available to you where you are based around the world. And from that, you can then also make a decision about your personal preference between paper or computer. Here's a nice little bit of inspiration for candidates coming up from their test. So congratulations, Bismi, who's saying I've got B grades in 4 modules on my first attempt. That's a really great result. I'm sure that came from a lot of hard work and preparation, Bismi. So we wish you all the best and thank you for coming on to let us know your good news. Priya on Facebook is saying, is it okay to write care and management together in the introduction part? So the only thing I would say about writing care and management or assessment and management is sometimes candidates use that as a bit of a generic phrase. They tend to add it as standard to any letter they write when they're practicing. But if they actually paid attention to the writing task or the final section of case notes, they would see that something more specific is being required of the reader, and that assessment and management or care and management doesn't really cover the reason for writing to the reader. So make sure you are personalizing your letter to the situation. Don't just include generic phrases that you've learnt. Make sure those phrases are relevant to the situation and demonstrate to the assessor that you have paid attention to the writing tasks or the reason for writing. Previous second questions, will there be any changes to the current OET? No changes are planned. The version of the test that we have right now is the one that we're planning to use for the foreseeable future. And I would just reassure you that we will never make any changes without giving candidates a lot of prior warning. So at least something like 6 months warning that any changes are suggested, and we'd give you early access to looking at what those changes might be. As I've said, there's no plans for any changes, any updates to OET at this point. So rest assured, the test that you can see right now is the one that will be continuing. Jaren on Facebook is saying, can you please tell me the correct organization and genre for OET writing? What's the best strategy for scoring a B in writing? So in terms of organization, my tip there would be to make sure you are thinking about the reader. Think about organizing your letter in order of importance to the reader, not what you think is important particularly, but what the reader would want to know as a priority. And as I mentioned a little bit earlier, a good way of ensuring that your organization is clear is making sure that each paragraph covers one specific topic or time period, not necessarily both, but it should be covering one topic in that paragraph. So that's a helpful tip for organization. In terms of genre, the required genre for your letter is to be formal and professional. So this means obviously avoiding informal expressions, colloquial expressions, idioms, contractions like can't or won't. Those sorts of things should be avoided to maintain the formality of your letter as it's required for OET writing. The informal expressions are much more suitable for speaking. Keep the formal language for OET writing. Jill New is saying, can you please tell me, is it necessary to put articles in reading part A answers? It doesn't hurt to add an article if you have heard it and it makes sense grammatically, but generally, as you'll see from the sample tests on the OET website and the sample test answers, articles don't form part of the answer. They'll be there, but provided in brackets to show that they are optional. You're not penalized if you omit it. So, as I say, it doesn't hurt to be as accurate as possible, but it's not something you specifically need to worry about including with your answer. Lindsay on Facebook says, a social worker who is meeting the patient for the first time and will be providing the service in the same place where the patient dwells. Is it a known or unknown case? So anytime the reader is meeting the patient for the first time, that definitely means they don't know each other. And even if it's the reader and the patient live in a similar local area, that by itself doesn't mean that they know each other. Official OET case notes will always make it clear if there's any existing relationship between the reader and the patient, so you won't need to guess. And that hopefully will reassure you to feel like you will understand that from the task. Saida is saying, is it mandatory to secure half of the correct answers in reading and listening parts B and C? So in terms of the way that reading and listening are graded, as you are probably aware, there are 42 questions for both reading and listening tests. And each of those parts of the tests are weighted equally, so you don't have to score more questions in one part of the test than another. However, within that, some of the questions are weighted slightly higher than others, which does mean that obviously if you fail to get one of those questions correct, you would need to get a couple of the questions that have been graded or weighted slightly lower to equal missing that slightly heavier weighted question. So there are certainly some questions that are more important to get right than others, but across the entire test paper, all parts of the test are weighted equally. So the advice that we give to candidates is when you're practicing with official OET practice tests, you're aiming to get a score of between 30, 31, 32 as a minimum. If you're getting that as a minimum regularly with official practice tests, then you should feel comfortable about booking your test with some more practice while you're getting ready for the test. You should find that you can be comfortable of getting the B grade that you want on test day. However, we would obviously encourage you to aim higher than that. Don't just settle for 30 to 32 in practice, because the more questions you get correct, the more you can improve your skills, the better the outcome is going to be, and the more confident that you can feel on test day. And this is linked to that. So do make sure that you are using official OET materials. We are obviously very aware that a lot of unofficial materials are being shared by candidates on social media groups in places like Telegram or WhatsApp or Facebook. And the quality of those materials, because they are unofficial, can be pretty shocking. Sometimes candidates share those materials with us, and we're pretty horrified about how bad those materials are in terms of the types of questions they're suggesting that you might be asked for different parts of the test, or the poor accuracy of the English that is being used in those papers. So to avoid any of those problems, any of those quality issues or accuracy issues, we strongly recommend you stick to the official materials that are provided for you on the OET Prepare page. I'm going to link to those materials again for you in the chat box now. Make sure you stick to those materials, or the materials that you can purchase from the OET shop, or the materials that you get from studying with official OET premium providers who have completed a very thorough training course which vets the quality of their materials to make sure that they are of an appropriate standard for OET. Hi is saying, do you have an English class? So personally, the only way that I am interacting with candidates is through Q&A live sessions. But I am thrilled to tell you about our OET AllStars. Some of you may have joined us last week or the week before for the OET AllStars live event, You Are Prepared, and you'll have seen a showcase of those All-Stars delivering their presentations. Well, those same All-Stars deliver live sessions to OET candidates every week on our social media channels. Some of you will have seen on YouTube yesterday a writing class delivered by our partners E2 Language. Coming up later this week, our partners at Celt, based in the UK, are going to be delivering a session on reading Part B. And next week, we'll have more live sessions from more of our All-Star Premium provider partners. So as I mentioned at the very start of the session, make sure you like our Facebook page, subscribe to our YouTube channel to make sure you're getting updates about those live events when they're happening, and also to replay those videos if you're unable to join live on the actual day. Heather is saying, in OET at home writing test, can I exceed the word limit of 200? So yes, it is physically possible to type more than 200 words into the text box for OET at home or on computer, in exactly the same way that it's physically possible to write more than 200 words onto your test paper. However, it may not be the most successful thing that you do, because part of the assessment criteria for writing is to check how effective you are at summarizing the case notes for the reader. And part of how you summarize is to omit irrelevant details that the reader doesn't need to know. And what often happens when candidates are writing more than 200 words is that they haven't done a very good job at omitting that irrelevant information, or they haven't managed to be very efficient in their summary. They've been very wordy. They've included too many details. So do be careful. Do think about if you are writing more than 200 words when you're practicing, what the impact on that could be for that assessment criteria, and perhaps consider proofreading in the last few minutes of your writing time, editing out content that you realize is actually irrelevant, or making things more concise and short. All right, I'm going to scroll ahead again a little bit further to look for some more questions. I see a few sort of repeat questions are coming in. This question from Clean is saying, is it mandatory to write 2 sentences in the introduction paragraph? There is nothing mandatory about OET writing or the OET test. You are in charge of organizing the letter in a way that you feel is clear to the reader, as I've mentioned a couple of times now. So that includes how many sentences go into each paragraph, how many paragraphs are in your letter, and so on. This question from YouTube, for writing, can you use pencil or pen? Are you allowed to erase on the paper or just put a line? So if you're taking OET on paper, this is your personal preference. You can choose to use either a pencil or a pen. If you're using pencil, yes, you can erase what you have written if you've made a mistake and then write over the top, or you can draw a line through the mistake and continue writing afterwards. The same is true with pen. You can draw a line through your mistake and continue writing afterwards. So either pen or pencil is accepted. I would suggest making your choice fairly early on in your preparation, so that as you get closer to test day, you can use either that pen or pencil that you're planning to use on test day to get comfortable with it, and to make sure it is comfortable for you to write with for 40 minutes. Uma is saying, what is the salutation for children in the introduction? So salutations mean things like Mr. or Mrs. or Ms. Another word for them is title. So when it comes to children, and children are considered a child if they are 16 years or younger, a title isn't actually recommended. This is seen as a little bit old-fashioned perhaps these days. So you can simply in the introduction mention their first name and their family name, and then after that in other paragraphs just use their first name. That's absolutely acceptable. DJ is saying, can you please make the pharmacy exam twice in the month? So it's nice to see interest in the pharmacy test. We have seen an increasing number of candidates taking pharmacy, and we definitely monitor those numbers each month to make sure that enough places are available to candidates. And certainly if we start to see increased demand for pharmacy coming through, we will consider increasing the frequency that the test is running. Here's a question from Roni from Facebook. In my test center during the exam, the invigilators were marching and disturbing, which caused high interruption to concentrate. So Roni, there's a couple of things here that I can mention. Obviously, to manage the security of the test, the invigilators are required at times to patrol the test room to make sure that they are getting good oversight of all the candidates to ensure that no cheating is occurring. That is an important part of managing test day security. However, if you feel that was excessive or it was impacting your ability to concentrate, then after your test, you're obviously very welcome to report that feedback to OET through a complaint form. And you can find the complaint process for OET on our website and submit that feedback within 2 days of your test. Mumba is asking from YouTube, how does the combination of results work? So some regulators who accept OET test results, and remember we have regulators for nursing, medicine, but also the 10 other professions. And each of those regulators in the different countries where OET is accepted tend to have different requirements from candidates. So the best thing that you can do to check the particular requirements for your personal situation is to visit the website of the regulator that you're thinking of applying to check which scores they require and to find out whether they will allow you to combine test scores from more than one test sitting. For nursing in particular, many of our regulators do accept combinations of test scores. So if you are a nurse and this is something that you feel might be helpful for you, again, please do go and visit the website of the regulator that you're considering applying to and find out their requirements and how that combination could work. Haritha is saying, does it affect scoring if there is any spelling mistake in reading and listening? So my answer is 50-50 here. If there is spelling mistakes in reading part A, yes, it will impact your score because the instructions state that your spelling must be absolutely 100% perfect for you to get the correct answer in reading part A. And that's because the answers for all of the reading part A questions can be found directly in one of the 4 texts and copied directly from that text into the answer. No changes are required from the text to the answer space. So you do need to make sure, and it's worth spending a few extra seconds once you've written your answer down, making sure that you have spelled each answer correct for reading part A. In listening part A, correct spelling is also heavily encouraged. Obviously, we want you to try to be as accurate as possible. However, there is a degree of flexibility available for you if you have made a minor spelling mistake and the assessor can still understand the word that you've written and it's the correct answer. There may be some flexibility with accepting that misspelling and you getting the question correct. Ashley says, in speaking task, is it okay to communicate to the patient with a salutation like Mr. John or Ms. Sarah? So this depends on what the patient has said they would like you to call them. And in Western healthcare settings, most patients will actually suggest that you can just call them by their first name. So for me, for example, it would be just Rebecca. And if you've asked me what name I would like you to use or what name you should call me by, and I say, please call me Rebecca, then it is appropriate and respectful to only call me by Rebecca, not to add a title, a salutation in front of that. Otherwise, it sounds like you perhaps didn't listen when the patient said what they would like you to call them. If the patient says they would like you to use the salutation with their name, then obviously that's absolutely appropriate. But if you've asked them and they've said just their name, then that's what we would recommend that you use. Mary says, if I've prepared well in the other 3 modules rather than the speaking, can I go for the test? So my advice would be to make sure you are fully prepared in all 4 modules. We want you to be successful as early as possible and without taking many resits. So making sure you are thoroughly prepared before your first test can mean that you get the results that you want first time around, like that candidate who contacted us inspirationally a little bit earlier to say they had managed it in one test result. The reason we see candidates not being successful the first time around is because they haven't put enough time or value into their preparation. All right, looking a little bit further ahead. May is saying, I'm a first timer taking the test. What should I bring to exam day for a paper-based test? So May, you'll need to bring with you your ID, and this should be the same ID that you use to book your test. You'll need to bring with you your stationery, so any pens or pencils, erasers or pencil sharpeners that you want to use on test day, you'll need to bring those in a clear plastic bag. You're also able to bring with you into the test room a water bottle, provided it's a clear plastic water bottle with no writing on it whatsoever. And then it could be that the test venue itself will have some specific requirements linked to COVID. So for example, they may require you to wear a mask, and that should be communicated to you by the test venue prior to your test day. But for all candidates taking paper-based OET, ID, water bottle, stationery are the things that you need to make sure you have. Anita says, if I forget the name of the patient during the role play, will it affect the scoring? No, not particularly. I mean, at the beginning, it's polite to use the patient's name, particularly if you've asked for it. But for the rest of the conversation, it's entirely possible for you to complete the rest of the 5 minutes without mentioning the patient's name again, and that's not going to have any significant impact on your score. Salome says, is it possible to write failed subtests? So again, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, this comes down to the regulators' requirements. They set the requirements for candidates rather than OET. I would say that the vast majority of regulators don't allow candidates to resit individual subtests. They all require candidates to resit the whole test, all 4 subtests, each time. So do make sure you check with the regulator you're interested in applying to make sure you understand the specific situation for her. For you, sorry, not for her. Tiger Lily saying, how many erasures can you use in OET writing when you use a pen instead of a pencil? Will you lose marks if you have too many erasures? Not at all. There's no limit on this. Just make sure if you are making erasures that you're doing that clearly. So make sure it's as neat as possible so it's not impacting the reader's ability to read your letter. But there's no penalty or limit to how many times you can erase something in your letter. Sunimol is saying, for speaking, I always get 340 or 330. What do I need to do to get a 350 or above? In my experience, where candidates are not getting the score that they want, they're not getting the 350, it really comes down to their performance in the clinical communication criteria. Remember, for OET, there are 2 sets of criteria that the assessors are using to score you on. Linguistic criteria, which candidates tend to be more familiar with because these exist for all types of English tests you may have taken in the past. These cover things like fluency, your accuracy, the appropriacy of your language, and so forth. But the clinical communication criteria are specific to OET, and although they are weighted lower than the linguistic criteria, there are still 15 marks up for grabs for the clinical communication criteria. And if you're not performing successfully across all of those with at least a 2 in each of those criteria, that's when you will be hitting below the 350. These clinical communication criteria are an essential part of the way healthcare professionals communicate with their patients. They're not testing you on your medical knowledge or your understanding of a medical situation. They're testing you on the way that you communicate medical information using clear English. So the way that you make your patient feel comfortable during the conversation, the way that you ask them questions and respond to those questions. Those are all English skills, but you're being tested on them in a healthcare setting. So if you're not getting the scores that you want in speaking, my recommendation would be to make sure you pay close attention to those speaking criteria. And I'm going to post a link to those criteria into the comment box now from our website. make sure you bookmark that page, download them, keep them somewhere handy, and regularly refer to them to understand what it is that the assessors are looking for. Linny says, in reading, must answers be in capital letters? No, there's no requirement for you to write your answers in capitals. You can if you prefer, but there's no requirement for you to do so. And many candidates don't write their answers, all in capital letters. All right, let's have a look for some different questions. I see a few repeats are coming through. If you've just asked a question and you haven't heard the beginning where I answered some of these questions I'm skipping now, then please do watch this session when it comes to an end and hear the letters that I asked earlier. We've got another inspirational student coming through saying videos and tips really helped a lot. I cleared my exam in my first attempt. Thank you so much. So we say congratulations to you. We really believe with the right amount of effort and correct approach to preparation, candidates can be successful with OET. And we really encourage you to take that time to make sure you are preparing properly. Even though we know it's really exciting that once you get your results, you can go on to bigger and better things. You can get there a lot quicker if you make sure you do the work first to prepare properly for the test and you have the English skills that you need for success. Usama is saying, is the 2-year expiration also applicable for ECFMG certification in the USA? So OET itself doesn't place 2-year expiration on results. This is something else that is decided by the regulators. So it's best to check with ECFMG if they do only allow a 2-year expiration on your results or not. That's something that they have set as a requirement, and I'm afraid I don't know the individual answer for that. Harshal is saying, how do we start communication with a patient? Can we ask for their name and details? So Harshal, this will depend on the roll card that you're using for your test. In some cases, it will be clear from the background information that you know this patient already, in which case you won't need to ask their name. You can instead perhaps ask them how they've been feeling since their last visit. Or perhaps the roll card will suggest that you have just been examining the patient and you're now about to give them your findings or advice or diagnosis, in which case, again, you wouldn't need to ask for the patient's name. So make sure you read the roll card carefully. You're given 3 minutes to prepare for the role play before the conversation starts. And these are some of the things that you should be thinking about before you start the conversation. Junior is saying, what is the YouTube channel? So all OET social media channels have the handle @officialOET. I'm posting that into the comment box now. So OET is on YouTube and Facebook and Instagram, and you can find all of those from @officialOET. Sharon is saying, is it necessary to summarize everything in speaking? Summary does form one part of one of the clinical communication criteria for speaking. So it is a useful skill to be able to summarize, but it doesn't necessarily mean at the end of the role play summarizing in full everything that has been discussed. Sometimes a summary can happen quite naturally within the conversation. For example, the patient might explain their symptoms and you might summarize them back to them. So there are a number of different ways that you can summarize in your role play. Obviously, you can, where it's appropriate and you have time, give a summary at the end of the role play, but there are other ways of summarizing within the role play. All right, we're coming towards the end of the time, the last 5 minutes. just going to pick a couple more questions and I'll give you some ideas about when I will be coming back with more sessions. So here we go. Let's find some questions. Here we go. In listening part A, is it okay not to include articles? Yes, actually, I did cover this question a little bit earlier as well. It's fine to include the article, but you'll see if you look at official OET sample tests, the articles are generally given in brackets to show that they're optional and you're not penalized if you don't include the article in your answer. Isra says, if I wanted to rearrange the paragraphs, can I do this with arrows instead of rewriting the whole paragraphs? Absolutely. So using editing shortcuts like arrows is advised, recommended even. The assessors are very familiar with following those editing marks to be able to read the letter in the order that you want it to be read. Abdul Rahman says, I need a one-to-one teacher. Well, as I mentioned earlier, when I was talking about all-star courses and live sessions, these teachers have been through very extensive and thorough training, and I can recommend any of them that you'll find on the link that I've just put into the chat now. So if you're looking for a teacher, then have a look at that page first, visit their website, have a chat with them, decide which one will work best for you. They are highly recommended. Rena is saying, what would you comment on about papers getting leaked or various other illegal things happening in OET, like papers being leaked and sold for money? So Rena, I would say that OET takes security of the test very, very seriously. It is a high stakes test, and that obviously means that there will be fraud out there. There will be people who want to rort the system, who want to do the wrong thing, who want to cheat. And OET will not accept cheats. Nobody benefits from cheating in OET. The way that we eliminate cheating from OET is through malpractice checks. So every month, some candidates may have their tests results withheld because we find evidence of cheating. Certainly, a number of candidates are investigated each time because we take this very, very seriously. To make sure that test papers are not leaked, we use a number of different test papers at different venues within the same country and in different country. So candidates cannot know which version of the test they are going to see, and to make sure that the integrity of the test is maintained. All right, that brings me to the last question that I'm going to be able to answer today. So I just want to give you some advance notice of when you can find me again on social media. So next week on Friday, the 5th of November, I'll be back for one of my informal live chats. These are just half an hour long. It's a way of connecting with the OET community, asking you some questions, sharing what the situation is like for me here in Australia and for you around the world while we're still living with COVID-19. And if you would like to join me for the next Q&A live session, this is coming up in just over a week on Monday, the 8th of November. This will be actually Tuesday morning, very early Tuesday morning in Australia, but still Monday in a number of parts of the world in Europe and across America. So if you'd like to join me for that, liking or subscribing our social media pages will mean that you get a reminder for both of those sessions. So thank you very much for joining me today. As always, it's been my pleasure to answer your questions. I wish you all the best in your preparation, and I will see you again very soon. Take care. Bye for now.